who was younger, and who did get an appointment in the Roosevelt administration, which is something that Mary Church Terrell had always wanted. She tried through several administrations to get an appointment and didn't. So there may have been a little bit of sense that someone who was younger and came along later maybe got sort of a prize that she had hoped to get to.
But you see them in pictures together.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, remember that these women of outsized accomplishment often brought outsized egos, and sensitive ones as well. So if you could imagine trying to put 3 or 4 thunderbolts in a small box, oftentimes there were, how shall I say, differences in terms of approach, in terms of priority. And they had to settle them. And that had to be worked out. It was amazing that they were able to come together and form the Women's Association when you consider the power that all of them brought. Mary McLeod Bethune, in addition to Mary Church Terrell, we're looking also at a phalanx of other strong women, even at one point Anna Julia Cooper. You try to put all of that in one box and say we're only going to listen to one person. No, that doesn't work. But they were able ultimately, at least publicly, as has been said here before, to sublimate their differences for the sake of a larger goal.
Where's the school?
Oh.
Why do you think she's been so overlooked? Rosa Parks, Ida B. Wells, people like that it seems like they have gotten more attention. How did it happen that she disappeared?
That's a really good question. I was trying to figure that out, and I wasn't sure if it was because she happened to be right on the cusp of these major events that happened, like right at the turning point. It's like that person that comes right before the person who wins the huge door prize, you know what I mean? So I don't know if it was a timing issue or what. What did you guys think?
I think it was in part a timing issue, that she, her big moment, her big Supreme Court win a year before she died was big news at the time. It was a huge decision, and it was very definitely part of the court's deliberate build-up, step by step by step, to Brown versus Board of Education. But a year later, when Brown integrated schools nationwide and in the District of Columbia, the legal, the moral, the intellectual, the jurisprudential force of that decision, of those decisions that came out with Brown, was enormous. And it's almost like that tidal wave of history that she absolutely helped the court get there by integrating what was going on right outside the Supreme Court building. It's like the tidal wave just overtook her. And then the movement was on to the South and to the next steps and the next figures, even though she was pivotal.
Exactly. Just before you jump in, that's one of the things her grandson had said. He's very frustrated by the fact that, she is one of those, as you say, a fundamental brick by brick, and she laid the foundation for the next, as you said, the next steps, which is a very integral part of those steps. Yeah.
I think that she also suffers from the lousy way we teach civil rights history. We throw at our children, like a bag of Doritos, a few names. There's no depth. There's no depth. So that right at the time almost of her passing, the work that led to DC's position in the desegregation of schools is unique. There is a court decision called Bowling versus Sharp. In other words, DC public schools, desegregation was decided by a separate case, but on the same day as Brown versus Board of Education, May 17th, 1954. But it is Bowling versus Sharp. And all of the people connected with the case that would lead to school desegregation in the nation's capital have been neglected to the nether regions, because the only point that gets taught is Brown versus Board of Education. And that's troublesome. Now, car properties, I think are the folks that own the building in the old Hex that she desegregated. I'm not one of those that wants to give them 50 cents or a cookie because they named it Terrell Place. Because any place can be named Terrell. Let's put it in perspective that you can understand. And all of you will do something great, I have no doubt, in the future. But if all we do is slap on the building that's supposed to commemorate your achievement, your last name, things could get confusing. So I prefer and hope that there will come a time when Carr or whoever the owner of the building will be at that time to put her full name on the building so there's no mistake about who this building is named for, because this is another way that the history gets passed on, and so you just don't feel that you've accomplished something because you remember the half dozen names of bigger people, all due respect to them. Because there's a whole substratum of heroes, male and female, that we need to know. Not just simply the shorthand of our history, but you need to dive into the depths and swim.
That's an excellent point.
It is. May I have one more point in response to that question? I also think that part of the reason she is not as well known is that she worked outside of the NAACP, or at least on that Supreme Court decision. She was a charter member of the NAACP. She was a founding member in 1908. But by the time the 1950s came along, the NAACP had been working under Charles Hamilton Houston at first, and then under Thurgood Marshall, on a very step-by-step approach to integrating schools. And she was controversial for any number of reasons, and a woman. And her mission of integrating Washington restaurants was not part of the NAACP's mission and strategy in the build-up to Brown. There were a lot of Southern white men on Capitol Hill, the politicians, who for decades had controlled segregation in Washington. And she was challenging that. So I can't say to a certainty that that's why the NAACP was not involved in her case, but I do know that Thurgood Marshall tried to become involved when the court agreed to hear it. He sent a letter to the court and asked to submit a brief. Now, by that point, she'd been doing it for 3 years with her committee and her activists. And look, Thurgood Marshall, very, very important. I'm not disrespecting the importance of what he did, but I do think there is another level to her relative lack of appreciation. And I do think it's that she was a strong, independent woman who said, I'm going to take on this fight, even if it's a difficult one.
Before we lose any more students, I want to hear from 2 Howard University students next.
Oh, okay.
All right. So we have several students here from classes. You should have some questions.
There's one young lady over there. And
So my question was just focused on how Terrell developed her philosophy or her approach to civil rights, because I wanted to know how she was raised and how much financial stability she had and leisure, really how much that impacted the way she approached civil rights compared to other significant characters in the movement.
That's a great question. From my research, there were what I found was that I think her incredible wealth gave her a lot of privilege to be controversial in the respect that, for example, just moving to DC, her father bought her a house. So I mean, she was taken care of. And I think you have a certain, you have a cushion in terms of, okay, she may be trying to get a job. I think at one point she did have a municipal job and she hated it. Did she get fired or did she quit?
I think she resigned.
Did she
I'm
resign?
not sure.
Yeah, but you can, it frees you so that you can walk away. What I was intrigued by was she very easily could have been a socialite. She could have, you know, just enjoyed herself, and I think there was something internally for her that made her want to do more. I think that was just her makeup, but I think the financial backing gave her maybe a little bit more freedom and a little more confidence to go about it the way that she did. But what did you?
I have nothing to add to that. That's, yeah.
That's
But,
true.
yeah, I did want to mention just something that I read in your book and also in my research too. What was fascinating was that her husband did not come from wealth, as you had mentioned. He was, you know, the descendants of slaves. And he was also working for the government, so to speak, as a judge. And in that role, you are on a fixed salary. And so it was interesting in that there was a tension between her comfort level in terms of what she wanted to spend and him wanting to be more conservative because he, you know, had a fixed income. And so I think I give a lot of credit to him as well, being a man, not having a lot of money, knowing that your wife probably, you know, she has a little bit more means. And I'm sure that probably wasn't the easiest for him to negotiate either.
Right. Right. I think he was able to, and in a manner that sort of presages what men should be doing today, and what many are, is being comfortable and understanding that your wife succeeds and you should enjoy that success, that it's not always about you, but live in a way that reflects a common sense of purpose as well as enjoyment. And they were able to do that. They were able to do that. And that extra money gave them the cushion in order to not have this as a raw edge of the sword kind of situation where they're constantly under pressure because they have to count every last dollar and dime.
Exactly.
All right, at least one more university student question before we open it up to our very welcome public who we're glad to have here.
Hello, my name is Morgan Smith. I'm a sophomore marketing major from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. A comment that struck me was talking about how in this generation it's perceived that we do so little when we have so much, which I do think is true. And I know that many students here at Howard University are here to get degrees to hopefully go to law school and hopefully be some of those influencers to change things. But while we're here and we're right in front of our country's capital, what can we do right at this moment?
Morgan, that's a great question. I think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it because, for example, I mean, you mentioned that the church, and I know as a student, when I was a student, I wouldn't know what to do. I mean, I wouldn't even know where to begin. Like, who do I talk to? I mean, so that she brings up a really good point. I mean, they're here studying. They have a mission, a sense of purpose. How do you even start?
I think you should have a sense, as you grow into your history, you should have a sense of long-term purpose backed up by your sense of short-term purpose. So that you're here to get an education, but this is not the rest of your life. And particularly for those of you in your own neighborhoods that have found, that ain't right. If you feel that way, then that gives you something to do, something to fight against, something to reveal, whether it's as humble as trash collection or it's as great as changing voting patterns or whatever it may be. If you feel that way, if you are conscious that change needs to be done in your neighborhoods, what can we say? You are the change you seek. So if you feel that way, now some students will never feel that way. I mean, they'll graduate, they'll get their degree, and they'll cash out. But for those of you that have that second-minded, longer-term sense of changing the inadequacies and inequities that you see around you, start here by building coalitions, by getting to know people that you just might be able to call on 5 or 10 or 15 years after you leave this campus.
Do you want to add anything?
Well, I was thinking, one of the causes to which Mary Church Terrell attached herself was the Equal Rights Amendment. Now, that was in the early 20th century, maybe the 1920s.
Yeah.
It shows that there's a long trajectory. So that doesn't help the short term. That's not a short-term answer, I'm so sorry. But she was always one to pick up signs and go protest on a corner. So she played the short game and the long game.
I know, she's been so patient.
I'll project.
It's just for the,
I run a civic engagement group called Black Washingtonians, and we were just discussing this. They know that I'm here, and I was looking to see if I saw any members because I told them they should be here. I wanted to address about her legacy and why it doesn't seem like it's very well known. I'm not from here originally, I'm from Detroit. I know about her because my background is in history, but I think that after talking to natives here, she was seen more as a local celebrity and not a nationwide celebrity because most of her work was concentrated here in DC. Now you would think that because DC is our nation's capital, that was enough, but like Rosa Parks, who lived in Detroit, but her struggle was nationwide. But I still think that she's of significance, especially here in the capital, because obviously segregation, this being formerly Chocolate City. So it was very disheartening to talk to a lot of natives as a transplant, and they didn't know who she was. I actually came here, I bought a book that had addresses of famous Black Washingtonians, and I actually spent the first 2 years driving to addresses and calling the Washington Historical Society and saying, why isn't there markers on these places? I mean, famous Blacks lived here or congregated here, and there's no mention of them. And as gentrification and revitalization is taking place, Black history in DC is disappearing. And so that's why I founded the group that I founded, to try to galvanize transplants and natives to take an interest in the rich Black history here. There's a dozen nonprofit organizations that offer volunteer opportunities for students like yourself. My daughter just graduated from Howard, and she got a job with a nonprofit through my group. And she wants to do exactly what you're doing. So the opportunity is here, but we need bodies. And we need motivation. That's what we need.
what's the name?
The name of your group again?
Black Washingtonians. It's on Facebook.
Okay, Black Washington.
Okay.
That's excellent, and that's a great point. And again, I mean, I'm embarrassed to say I really didn't know about her. I mean, I'm originally from Columbia, Maryland, just 40 minutes north of here, but I hopped around and came back, but she was not someone that I knew of until I was working an assignment. And what's interesting too is that she was very local, but she also had a national and international speaking. She was on the international and national speaking tour. So more people should know more about her. I mean, going through her papers, I found all sorts of programs talking about how she was speaking here, speaking there. She gave a speech in German, I think. I mean, so she was multilingual, spoke internationally. She spoke at an international women's conference in was it in France?
France or German.
Yeah.
She spoke in French, but I think it was in German.
Okay, yeah, so she spoke in French, but the conference was in Germany. So she was really an international figure as well. And you're absolutely right. I mean, more people should know about her. Did you want to add anything?
No, maybe the house will help. Maybe
Yeah.
if the house becomes
Yeah.
more, the draw it should be. I'm sorry?
What's your name again?
Mine?
Is your name in the group?
No, you know what?
No.
It was my fault. Late add on. It's Joan Quigley. And her book is, well, you
Just another
Yeah,
Southern
just another
town.
Southern
So
town.
what's the address of the school she worked at as on the board of the education?
The Franklin Building on 13th Street, right by the park.
Oh,
for.
Microphone, please.
It's not coming, oh, okay.
I wanted to thank you for making the film. Really, thank you for making the film, and I hope that you're able to screen it at high schools as well as colleges so that our young people will become, and elementary schools, middle schools, so that our young people will become more familiar with the work that she has done. And I think it's quite significant to recognize that she's not the only person who has done a lot of good work, whose names we're not really aware of. People like Maggie Lena Walker. I think a lot of more people might know about Nannie Helen Burroughs.
Francis Press.
Well, I'm really thinking about people who were active during that period of time, like the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And I was wondering what the panelists thought about the fact that a lot of people who were very active during those days, abolitionists, people who were educators, bankers like Maggie Lena Walker, how significant in terms of their drive was it that they had an experience of living during the period of Reconstruction, where there weren't all of these laws, which was really represented a backlash of segregated eateries and segregated forms of transportation. And, you know, in terms of their drive, because there were a lot of activists during that, a lot of people like Mary Church Terrell. And so I'm wondering, you know, how you feel that may have contributed to the psyche of the people of that day, where they're just coming out of a period of enslavement, and the goal is to educate the race, and they're doing all these things that, you know, people of color were not able to do before. And then all of a sudden, there's this backlash. You can't do this, you can't do that. And how that might have contributed to their drive, having experienced some measure of freedom. And then, you know, people of this generation, our young people, have never experienced that. It's always been laws to fight against. You can't do this, you can't go here, segregation, you know, it's like always, you know, we're resisting trying to reach this. Whereas Mary Church Terrell, her, I guess the first 10 years of her life, or in the beginning of her life, there wasn't that type of existence of laws and restrictions.
Well, I'll just say that when I, a couple weeks ago, actually 2 weeks ago, my other film about Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer was being screened at the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. And what was fascinating was that I was reading after the Civil War, when the white South was a mess, and there was the northern occupation, all of these successful black businesses started to crop up. And then there was this record number